Hello and welcome to the Giving Voice to Depression podcast, produced in partnership with the A.B. Korkor Foundation for Mental Health. I'm Terry, the creator and co-host of this podcast. I've lived with depression most of my life, and I know how easy it can be to feel all alone in the experience. I'm not alone, and you aren't either.
And I'm Dr. Anita Sands, a licensed clinical psychologist and life coach with a number of my own diagnoses, all of which bring a certain amount of anxiety and depression along with them. There is great power in shared experiences. We share our own as we engage in intimate and candid conversations with our weekly guests, exploring different perspectives on and experiences with depression.
We keep it real because depression is real. We keep it hopeful because there truly is hope, in spite of what depression tells you.
Hi, Terry.
Hello, Anita. So if you were to overhear someone telling the story you're about to hear now, you would likely think it's the recap of some Netflix movie and not our guest's true life story. Even the comments from others who've heard of Sebastian Sloven's journey describe it in terms that sound like movie reviews. A powerful story about facing one's fears and choosing a different path. A son's transformative journey to process the pain of his father's suicide by embarking on a journey of self-discovery. And his transformation and healing from a place of darkness to a place of wholeness that touches upon every emotion of living, loving, and healing in the aftermath of a devastating loss.
We interviewed Sebastian in 2018 when he released his memoir, Ashes in the Ocean, a reference to scattering his own father's ashes. As background, Sebastian's father, Vernon, was a champion competitive swimmer in South Africa. He prided himself on being the best, and not only in sports. So when he took his own life, his family was left with many questions, and his son made it his mission to answer the big one. Why? Sebastian's dedication to that task and the literal lengths that he went to get a complete portrait of his father are what first caught our attention. But what's made us remember his story all these years is that because of the answers he found talking with his father's friends, he was able to step in and change the course of history for another family when another father was suicidal. So here now is Sebastian Sloven, giving his voice to depression.
Sebastian's early life was picture perfect.
I was very fortunate to grow up in an affluent suburb of San Diego called La Jolla, coastal community. And as a young boy, I really felt like I had it all. My dad, kind of a hero of a dad. He was this, legendary swimmer, successful businessman. My mom was awesome and had a little sister and, kind of the ideal upbringing.
Ideal until it wasn't.
While everything seems sort of perfect on the outside, behind the scenes, my dad was struggling with depression and a number of things. And eventually this got so much that he took his own life when I was 6. Leaving, my mom and sister and I kind of in the emotional wake of it and also in pretty bad financial shape. And, that completely changed, obviously it changed our family dynamic, but changed my life. I felt like everything was, turned upside down and I really struggled to process what had happened. And as I got older, that for me looked like a lot of isolation and doing whatever I could to not, feel or, talk about my dad or his death. And it got kind of worse and worse as I went through my teens, self-medicating and just doing what, distracting myself, doing whatever I could. And I got to the point where I was struggling myself with depression, was never diagnosed, but, was certainly in a very, very dark time in my teens and considered suicide myself.
So at about 17, Sebastian, who says he was struggling with lots of things, including school, took some time to travel as a professional bodyboarder. He made a trip to Perth, Australia, the town where his father died, and stayed with one of his father's close friends.
I knew the topic of my dad would probably come up, and the first day, when I arrived, he invited me to go out on this walk around the neighborhood, and after a few minutes of small talk, he just kind of jumps into it. He's like, your dad meant so much to me and to my family, and he was such a dear friend, and kind of sharing his experience of dealing with the loss, and I was just sort of like, I didn't say anything. I was just super tense, and I feel my heart racing and all this stuff. And I was like, what do I do? How do I get out of this without talking about it?
And then the conversation shifted and became what Sebastian calls a major turning point in his life and recovery.
Then he goes on to share that his dad had taken his own life when he was a boy. He was, I think, 12 years old. And he described a lot of the same things that I had been going through. He shared how he didn't talk about it for many years, and how that he wished he had started to process this sooner. And because of the stigma and the shame, I never talked about it, or never felt like I could talk about it. And it wasn't until someone who had been through this before and come out the other side that was like, oh my God, it doesn't have to be my fate to do what my dad did. And there are other options for me. And there's a lot of other people who have been through this and have come out the other side. And kind of after he shared, I felt not only that I could share, but I wanted to share. I became aware of how much I was holding on to that I maybe didn't need to. And it was this incredible opportunity.
Sebastian seized that opportunity. On his way home, he made a list of his father's friends, business partners, people he'd grown up with, about 40 in all, in 6 or 7 countries. And then he started talking with or visiting them in what is poetically described as a pilgrimage that led him around the world and eventually back to himself.
I think initially it was, I want to know how someone who had it all could do this. A lot of these conversations were full of tears on my end, and sometimes anger and a lot of different stuff. And it was kind of with each one, I kind of like my capacity to feel grew.
So the questions, were you saying, tell me about my father? Were you saying, do you have a deeper understanding of how his life could have ended this way? I mean, I do interviews, and I don't know how I would do those.
Yeah, and I think it sort of varied depending on who I was talking to. I would often ask what they saw, what they saw were his strengths, and I was also curious about what his shadow side, or what they saw as maybe some of his weaknesses. And I was also very interested in hearing how his death impacted them and how they processed it, and what they years later what they made of it.
While Sebastian started his intense personal journey trying to avoid following in his father's fatal footsteps, he ended up learning lessons that help him live an examined life.
The big lessons were how to live well and how to thrive.
So does understanding your father more as a whole human being with frailties and vulnerabilities and pain and failings in addition to successes help you understand it more, or did that all become less important as you realized there was just a better or more balanced way to live a life that maybe didn't rely so much on identifying with those successes?
Yeah. I think that's certainly part of it. I think, he was the epitome of the man who had it all together. I think it weighed on him to try and keep, the things that weren't going so well under wraps. It was clear that a major part of his identity, or his self-value, was in things external to him. So the amount of money he made, his physical appearance, his physical ability with swimming, his kind of status in society. He was getting older and slowing down physically. When those things started to fade, there wasn't really much to fall back on. That way, all his sense of self was in those things.
When we repeatedly say that speaking openly about mental health can save lives, we don't mean it in some fluffy, abstract way. Many times you won't know the impact your conversation has had. Other times, you most certainly will. Because Sebastian's father's friend shared his story of loss, struggle, and recovery, Sebastian is now willing and able to do the same. So one day, when a friend of his, who did not know of his childhood loss, got a phone call that her father had just attempted suicide but had been stopped by her brother, the two of them raced to the house. Sebastian offered to talk to the man, who he had never even met. The man agreed.
It was just wild to be in the situation. And I remember as I'm walking into this room, to the bedroom, I had this really clear sense, this deep sense that this is an opportunity to talk to my dad if he didn't die.
Oh, that's surreal.
Yeah, it was, and I'll never forget this feeling. It was like I had total clarity, you know, or there wasn't like any stress or anxiety around it. It was like, this is an incredible gift right here. And I go into this room and, you know, it's dark and the energy is intense, you know, the curtains are shut and, you know, he's kind of, you know, in bed with the covers up and he's just kind of staring blank at the ceiling. And I sit down next to him and just sort of start to share about my experience losing my dad and not to make him feel bad or, you know, but just kind of sharing like, you know, I have a sense of what pressure you're under and like knowing my dad's story. And then he just starts to open up and share back to me and we go back and forth for a while. And, you know, I think what I came to kind of explain to him, I guess in short was like, you know, there's a lot of factors going on, but I would much rather have a dad around who is maybe in his own mind a failure or whatever. You know, there's a lot of comparing to other people and competition and financial stuff and all sorts of things. You know, at the end of the day, I would, you know, do anything to just have a dad around. And there's, you know, just like tremendous value in you being just around and breathing. And, you know, it was like nothing new to him, I don't think, but it was, I think having the conversation was definitely a helpful reminder and a helpful thing for both of us. And he, you know, shortly after that was like, okay, you know, what do we have to do? And, you know, we took care of kind of the necessary steps, like get him into a hospital, get him treatment, you know, seeing professionals and all that. And I was able to go with him to the hospital.
The exact hospital where Sebastian's father had died. Sebastian visited the man from time to time as he recovered and reports he's now doing well and that the two of them are still connected today. It's like emotional healing dominoes. The first story shared leads to others, and they all lead to understanding that we are not alone, that there is always hope and the chance that our situation will change, and that any one of us can be a catalyst for that change if we are willing to listen to and respect a person's struggle and be there for them until the storm or the crisis passes. So, Anita, we usually start with you responding to the interview, but I have so many questions that I want to present to you about this story as a therapist. Can I do that this time?
You sure can try. I don't know that I'm going to have the answers. This is pretty wild.
It is. It's fascinating to me. So one of the main lessons that Sebastian himself learned and that I from him is the danger, I'm going to say, the risk of having your self-worth be defined by external variables, whether, you know, your income, your appearance, your status. How do you think that plays into this situation? And you've probably learned through your clients that there is an issue with doing that.
Yes, absolutely. And I think philosophers have been, you know, writing about this stuff for years too, that the more that you equate your worth with things that can be lost, the more vulnerable that you are to, you know, just all the things that can happen to us in our lives. So if how much money you have in the bank, what people think about you, you know, whether you can get into college, which college, career stuff, even defining yourself by certain things like whether or not you're in relationships or partnerships or marriages or things like that, whether or not you have children. We can be successful by those standards one day, and the next they can be gone. Yeah. And so what do we advise that people do instead? Well, you want to think about your worth as a human being, first of all, as not something that is dependent on something external or outside of yourself, something that would have to be earned, something that has to be validated by others. So there's lots of ways to do this by building self-esteem and self-worth, by exploring your own spiritual path, for example, because most spiritual traditions would suggest that your worth is not something that you have to earn. if how good you feel about yourself is dependent on how successful you are by metrics that can shift and change or be completely eliminated, it puts you at incredible risk for feeling worthless. And that's what depression would feed on. Right?
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So there's so many. Are there enough layers in this story? I don't even know where to start.
Yeah.
How important is it after a loss, and we're just straight up talking suicidal loss here, to be able to begin processing that in a way that is not totally isolated?
I think it's incredibly important. And I think to add to that, in addition to not sort of sealing something off in following that loss and just trying to I'm going to put it away and never feel it. It's also important to realize that with a loss this important, you will grieve that for the rest of your life. Mm-hmm. You want to be there. You want to have access to your feelings of grief and loss at the time of the loss, but you're going to experience loss through many, many points in time in the future. Mm-hmm. And you also want to know that that's normal and allow that to be there too. And that's why we say that happy moments as you go on in life, once you've lost someone like this, someone so incredibly important, those moments will always be a little bit bittersweet. So happy that you get this award or graduating or getting married. Also sad that this person is not here to be able to experience it with you the way that you would like. Yeah. Okay,
so the wild part of the story.
Oh my gosh.
As a result of all of this information that Sebastian gathered and garnered and processed, he's in a situation where a friend of his gets a call. Her father has just attempted suicide or was about to. And he goes into the bedroom with him. He's never met this man, and he talks with him, and he helps him understand he would rather have his father around, even if in his own mind he was a failure, and that there is tremendous value in you just being here and breathing. And I said before we started recording, that I had goosebumps when I read that. This was how many years ago? And I have them right this minute. Mm-hmm. That is an amazing encounter. That is such humanity there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm feeling that too. And there's no one other than Sebastian, because of what he went through, who could speak with that authority. Ugh. You could not say to a man who is feeling like a failure, who thinks that it would be better off for his family and his kids to not be alive. You could not hear, your kids actually want you here, just breathing, just being. Even if you feel like a failure, they want you here in that state, as opposed to you taking your life. The only person that I think you could really feel like, I might believe that, really believe that there could be truth to that statement, could be from somebody like Sebastian. And there's just incredible power, authenticity, integrity to that. It came out of such incredible pain and loss. Sebastian could have taken a different road. He could have been so devastated from this loss. He could have struggled with depression. Depression could have taken him. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And this entire story is just, to me, like this incredible example of what I've seen in so many stories in my life and in working with clients, where you really do not know how something that you go through is going to be important someday, not just in your life, but in somebody else's life. Because we don't know all the ways that our life is going to intersect with others. You know, we really do belong to this incredible tapestry. And yes, we're just one string, but we intersect. We will be woven into the lives of other people in ways that we really don't know. We can't predict in the future. You know, you're needed, you belong, you're worthy, your life is important, you matter. These are things that we say all the time. But I think Sebastian's story pretty much illustrates that in a way that you could not make up. You could not make up a story like this. Mm-hmm. I mean, you could, but the fact that it's real, it's real life, is, to me, gives power to those little cliches that we say all the time. This made this real to me in just a very, very profound way. And I hope people really, really take it to heart. You know, to me, that message that life is valuable. Your life is valuable, even when you are completely unable to find the worth or the value in yourself or your life at the moment. That is a normal way to feel and to be at certain points in time, based on all kinds of circumstances, all kinds of disease processes. That can be the truth, that you can feel completely worthless, but that is not the truth. Sebastian knew it. He knew it. He'd experienced it. He would have given anything for his dad to be here and say, feel worthless. We'll fight through that together. We'll get help. We can get to another place where you recognize that you have value above and beyond being a competitive swimmer whose time has passed on that, or the financial issues, any things that, that were making him feel less than.
And I think the fact that Sebastian had such knowing allowed him to walk into what is really an intense, to put it mildly, situation, completely calmly, knowing that he had a truth to impart to this man, as opposed to like, this is like, I didn't even like working at a crisis line because every time I picked up the phone, I was nervous I'd say the wrong thing. He wasn't nervous. He had the right thing to say, and he was certain of that. Yeah. He knew the message he wished he'd been able to tell his father. There is value in you being here.
I know. I'm
so glad.
Incredible.
I'm so glad this episode came up again, so we were able to dive into it.
So appreciative of this, Terry.
So, as always, we don't sell anybody's books, but if you want to know more and hear more of Sebastian's story, the book is called Ashes in the Ocean. And then if you Google that, you'll be able to find it and some more information about Sebastian and his father.
We truly hope that our podcast brings a little more understanding, helps you better articulate and reflect on your own experience with depression, or better understand how to support someone else who is struggling.
If this episode has been of comfort or value to you, know that there are hundreds of others like it in our archive, which you can easily find at our website, givingvoicetodepression.com. And remember, if you're struggling, speak up, even if it's hard. If someone else is struggling, take the time to listen.